Hey everybody, on here, and I decided to get outside this month, which is great. I'm down by the creek on the property, and we've got some nicer weather coming in these days. As you can see, the snow is off the ground now, so that definitely makes a difference for us. And wanted to share some thoughts this month about the benefits of living sacred. And this is a thing that we don't often talk about, but it is one of those things that can be really powerful in our life. It's one of those things that can really make a huge impact and a huge difference for us in our life. And we have all these different concepts around what living sacred is about, which is kind of interesting because a lot of times it gets connected to religions or spiritual practices or things like that. And people start to connect living sacred with deprivation, or that it is about this aspect of being deprived of things. And a lot of people think of that as well when they think of materialism, which is really interesting because when we look at sacred from the perspective of codes, it really is about letting go of materialism. But the piece that a lot of people miss is that just because you're letting go of materialism doesn't mean that you have to live in deprivation. And they're very big different things when we look at that. So this aspect of being sacred or living sacred or things like that, it comes around to saying where you're no longer worshiping material things. You're no longer doing everything for material things. It's no longer your primary force or your primary drive that's going on. Your primary drive shifts to living in the spirit, living in the soul itself, living through divine presence, through God, through divine source, and letting that be the source of your motivation and your energy and your life, your sense of life, your sense of being alive in there. Now, when we talk about living sacred from a code perspective, we're really talking about building relationships. And these relationships, a lot of times when we think of relationships and friendships and partnerships. And I talk a lot about that in the 2023 book, which, by the way, is coming out. I've just finished the writing part of that. And it's going to be coming out this late summer, early fall. So watch for that. And I'll be touring around, so watch for that to come up as well. But getting back on point here, it's about relationship. And those relationships are not just to people in our lives, but to ourself, to our soul self, the relationship that we carry with divine, with that thing. And what's really important is so many times we go on autopilot, so we don't really think about bringing in the sacredness to everyday life. And we don't think about making everyday life, everyday tasks that we do in life sacred. And this is really the difference where we cross the line between appreciating things that are sacred to living sacred. And this is where we start to cross over, and like a lot of people can go, wow, I can really appreciate the purity of energy. I can really appreciate how sacred that feels, or how sacred this spot feels, or whatever it is. But then at the same time, they're not always living in a sacred way. And if we live in a sacred way, then we make everything sacred, in a sense. Everything becomes this, it has this special essence to it. But when we're only appreciating what is sacred, then we're missing a lot of what's sacred, in a sense. So when we look at this aspect, the benefits when we start to make this relationship is this relationship in living sacred almost assures us success in the world. It almost assures that whatever we start to work on and start to do will be successful. And this comes from an aspect that in some ways kind of connects into the aspects of living in gratitude and living in appreciation, and that law of attraction kind of principle that goes on in a lot of philosophies, belief systems, things like that. And so you do develop this deeper appreciation for things. Because what happens is when you're living sacred, you are building a relationship with everything that you do, everything that you connect with, every person that you interact with. And it takes practice. I'm not going to say I'm 100% perfect at it, because we all kind of have our days, if nothing else, that we go into autopilot, that we go into just doing things without necessarily thinking about them. But when we come into the sacredness, we realize, for example, how much it takes to put that meal on the table. It's not just about the work or the hours or things like that, but it's the whole process of nature. It's the whole process that everything goes through that brings it around. And so we have this amazing divinity that comes up in it. And prayer was really about this appreciation factor. When you look at it, it wasn't all about religions. It was about the gratitude for having something to put in the body, to keep going, to keep having this interaction, to keep having this relationship in the world. And then when you look at the aspects of which each piece is, we take for granted, say perhaps brushing your teeth in the morning, right? Something as simple as that. But when we live in the sacredness of the act, we understand the wisdom. What we're doing is we're seeing the value in it. We're seeing how it assists and facilitates our success in the world. It facilitates our ability to draw in amazing things in our life. And that's where some of this power of acknowledging what is sacred or living sacred comes from, because it can see the value and the beauty in everything. And once we start to do that, we've automatically got a relationship with it. Once we start this relationship with it, it automatically wants to feed and nourish our success in the world. It's the nature, the way connections work in things. So this living sacred aspect is a partnership with everything. And this unfolds almost unlimited benefits in the world. And you can't be deprived when you are living sacred. There's so much fulfillment, and it's not just the abundance that wells up from within and flows up inside of you, but it is this wholeness of all these pieces coming together, of this amazing interaction that's happening. So let's look at, too, the way sacred flows in the world, or the way sacredness flows in the world, because sacredness is about, again, understanding the values. Sacredness connects past, present, and future when we look at it from a code perspective. So it really is this aspect of saying, yeah, man, I had one relationship with this aspect of life, or whatever you want to say, a situation in life, and I've learned from it, and now I can create a different situation, and now honoring it and knowing it more and realizing its value more, I can then bring in a new dimension to it, or I can bring it in a different way. Or so you're constantly in this creator space of creating things, and so the sacred aspect allows us to constantly be creating towards a favorable future. So the more that we can come into sacredness, the more that we can create that favorable future, which is really cool. Now, sacred always starts with the self, and a lot of people think, well, isn't that selfish? You know, why would you start with you? Well, because really when we understand our connection, we get down into the depths of it, right? We are source. We are connected to source. We are interrelated with source. So when we connect with ourself, when we're connecting with our true self and our soul self, we, in essence, that's what we're doing. We're connecting with that source energy, God, whatever your terminology is for that. And then we are tapping into the wisdom of that source energy. And we are tapping into what it has to share, what it has to teach us. And this is another aspect that comes with living sacred, is that you're constantly learning, you're constantly opening to the experience of what you're doing instead of just doing it and going through the motions of it. It's a constant learning experience, because everything is sharing all of this wealth of information with you, which I talk about a lot in the codes of, you know, the codes are all about that. You have this wealth of information all around you. And then it comes into as you tap into that wisdom, that's where you start to generate the luck. That's where you start to generate things that are happening. And as you do that, when we're living sacred, we then embrace the journey. And along that journey, it's probably going to test us, or we might have to show some trust along the way. And that's not even so much testing, but it's trusting that divine flow provides for everything, that divine source provides for everything. So when we look at that, we have this an amazing thing that happens in that journey process. That's the aspect of calling us to really experience whatever we're doing in the moment. And then with that trust aspect, what it does is it brings us back to home. So in essence, we're starting and ending with source energy, just in kind of different ways. So it brings us back to home. And when we come back into home, we are centered, we are whole, we are powered. And that's why things feel this kind of magical feel, this sacred feel to them. And, you know, in the sacredness, that actually continues. And once we connect with that home again, it goes in and it shows us what is needed. And then we have to trust that those needs will be fulfilled, and that they are being fulfilled, or they will be fulfilled through trust. And then that brings us back into the self. And again, that self coming back into the center and realizing how this power is moving through you, how this force of energy that is so divine and so beautiful and so pure is moving through you. So sacredness doesn't mean that you're never going to make a mistake. It doesn't mean that you're never going to have a rough day or go mindless. I mean, I do it all the times. I've had points in my life where I pray over every meal, and I do that, and then sometimes I fall into these places where I just naturally forget to do that prayer. And I'm already in that appreciation. In a sense, I just keep flowing with it, but it's also important to take the time to actually do it. And so these are the things that when you start living sacred, this is where you feel everything. This is when you can tell when the storms are going to come in. You can tell when things are opening. Things are flowing body, mind, and spirit for you. And the blessings that come out of that, the gifts that come out of that, the benefits that come out of that are truly incredible. And they're far more incredible than what you get from focusing on material things. So when we learn to let go of this materialism, when we learn to stand in the soul self, we are being sacred. We are honoring the essence of sacred, and we're inviting it into every piece of our life. So I encourage you to do that. Thank you for hanging in there with me through this. I appreciate it. I hope you guys all have an amazing rest of the month. We're getting ready to enter into May, and we should be getting leaves on the trees soon. We've stayed cold here in Maine a little bit longer, I think, than normal, but hey, we're good. And I think I'm going to be able to hit summer close by the time I cut the next video. And then after that, I'm going to be close to going back out on the road again. So hopefully I'll connect with some of you live and in person when I do that. So watch for me to post things up and see where I'm going to be. And I'm going to be all over the U.S. Hopefully this year. I've still got everything in motion and plans, and again, we'll keep you posted. I've gotten through a huge portion on the book right now, and it's just kind of down to doing some proofreading and publishing things and those sorts of things. So watch for it. Again, it'll be coming out late summer, early fall, and I will see you then. Take care.